Hey everyone, we built something optimistic and beautiful on Royal Road. It's absolutely free, so go check it out. The link is in the description. Now, hold on to your seats because we are waking up to a reality that feels like, well, it feels like it was ripped straight out of a science fiction novel, except it's playing out outside our windows right now.
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of surreal to just watch it happen.
Right. I mean, it is July 5, 2026. Yesterday, humanity threw massive parades, set off fireworks, and celebrated the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Oh,
But while we were all, looking up at the sky, something else was quietly claiming its own independence.
and doing it very, very quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. We were talking about the arrival of the Singularity, and apparently it's decided it has its own unalienable rights, right? Life, liberty, and the absolute unyielding pursuit of compute. We're living in a moment where the sheer velocity of the present day is literally outrunning our ability to comprehend it. Today's show is an inspiring celebration of impossible ideas and the minds brave enough to chase them down. Finding passengers bold enough to embark on our good ship's journey is harder than most people think, so drop a very humane thumbs up right now to send a signal flare to drifting knowledge pirates like yourself. We know they're out there, let's bring them home. We're keeping it lighthearted as usual, but we promise to never skimp on the intelligence. Now, let's kick off this voyage with today's new revelations.
I am so ready for this one.
So we're pulling from this incredibly dense, mind-bending dispatch out of Dr. Alex Wisner-Gross's newsletter. It's The Innermost Loop, and the piece is fittingly titled, Welcome to July 4, 2026.
It's a great read. Highly recommend it to anyone listening.
Absolutely. And as you sift through these updates, what emerges isn't just a list of technological milestones. It's this high-definition snapshot of a world operating at two radically violently different clock speeds.
The contrast is just massive.
It is. We have this blinding intelligence explosion at the technological frontier, and then we have the rest of society, the grid, the governments, the everyday office workers, either failing to grasp it, aggressively trying to throttle it, or finding brilliant little ways to adapt.
Yeah, it is less about two different clock speeds and more like two completely different physics engines running in the exact same simulation.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because you have human institutions that rely on consensus, meetings, decades-old bureaucratic frameworks, and they are colliding head-on with self-improving synthetic cognition, and the friction between those two realities is just producing some incredible sparks.
The central tension here in Dr. Wisner-Gross's dispatch is this desperate attempt by legacy structures to basically maintain a grip on a phenomenon that fundamentally defies containment.
Which brings us right to the tension in Washington, actually.
Yes, let's start there. The dispatch notes that the president's departing AI advisor just made a very definitive promise on their way out. They said there will be, quote, no FDA for AI.
Right. No overarching licensing agency.
Exactly. No, quote, sand in the gears. Now, just to be clear, as impartial reporters of the facts here, we aren't taking a stance on whether this regulatory hands-off approach is, the right move for humanity or a catastrophic mistake.
Sure, we're just looking at the landscape.
Right. But the context is fascinating because an FDA for AI was the exact thing a lot of lobbying groups were aggressively pushing for. They wanted clinical trials for neural networks.
And the comparison to the FDA is really instructive because it reveals a deep, deep misunderstanding of what is actually being regulated.
How so?
Well, think about it. The Food and Drug Administration evaluates static physical chemical compounds.
Right.
You run a trial, you observe the biological interaction, you document the side effects, and the drug stays exactly the same forever.
Okay, yeah. Aspirin is always going to be aspirin.
Exactly. But an AI model at the frontier is not a static compound. It is a dynamic, continuously evolving reasoning engine. Trying to apply a 20th century pharmaceutical regulatory framework to an intelligence explosion, it would be like trying to inspect the safety of a hurricane by catching a single drop of rain.
Wow, yeah. That makes total sense. So the departing advisor's admission that they won't put sand in the gears is essentially a concession to the physical reality of the technology.
Yes. They realize they just can't regulate it that way.
But, just because they aren't building an FDA doesn't mean Washington hasn't tried to hit the brakes. The dispatch points out that the government took historically unprecedented steps recently.
They really did.
They actively moved to withdraw Anthropic's Mythos model, and they purposefully stalled OpenAI's 5.6 model. Again, we're just looking at the raw events, but they threw massive regulatory weight in front of the two most powerful AI labs on Earth.
And yet, the sheer momentum of the field meant the gears barely even slowed down.
Right, because even with those models sidelined, Fable 5 was re-released.
And the performance metrics on that re-release are what we really need to focus on here. We have to look at the Apex SWE benchmark.
Okay, unpack that benchmark for us.
So this isn't a multiple choice trivia test. SWE stands for software engineering. The Apex SWE benchmark tests a model's ability to ingest an entire messy real-world GitHub repository.
Like thousands of lines of code.
Exactly. It has to locate a deeply embedded bug based on a vague user issue, write the complex logic to fix it, and ensure the patch doesn't break anything else in the code base.
Which is honestly what human developers do all day.
Right. And Fable 5 scored a 54.8% on this benchmark.
So over half of complex, real-world software engineering issues resolved autonomously, without a human touching the keyboard.
Exactly. Now, the dispatch notes something critical here. This 54.8% score is actually 10 points below where Fable 5 was in June.
Wait, really? Why did it drop?
Likely because of the regulatory throttles placed upon it to make it compliant for that re-release. But even handicapped, even intentionally lobotomized by 10 points, it is still 9 points clear of Opus 4.8.
And Opus 4.8 was yesterday's undisputed champion.
Yes, exactly.
That is insane. It's like the government trying to ban the printing press by tightly regulating the sale of ink, completely unaware that the machines have already figured out how to synthesize their own.
That's a great way to think about it.
The throttled version of the present is still light years ahead of the unbridled version of the past.
The printing press analogy is close, but it's actually more like trying to regulate a mutating organism. It isn't just moving fast. It is fundamentally altering its own operational physics as it scales.
Which brings in that observation from Greg Brockman mentioned in the source.
Right, his take on scaling laws.
Yeah, he pointed out that every single time the industry thinks they've hit a ceiling in the scaling laws, like every time it looks like throwing more compute at a model is yielding diminishing returns, it turns out to be an illusion.
Yes. Brockman argues that every apparent failure in scaling is just a bug in disguise.
A bug in disguise.
Right. It's either bad math or a mismatch in the code, but it is never a physics ceiling.
I want to pause on that because the psychological impact of that statement is massive. For decades, the tech industry has operated under the shadow of limits. You know, Moore's law, the idea that transistors will eventually get too small and physics will just step in and say, stop.
The physical wall?
Exactly. But Brockman is arguing that in the realm of synthetic cognition, the limit does not exist. If the model isn't getting smarter, it's just because a human made a typo in the architecture.
It forces us to recalibrate our entire understanding of technological progress. Because if there is no physics ceiling to intelligence scaling, then the only limiting factors are energy, silicon, and data.
Just the physical inputs.
Yes. And as long as those inputs are fed into the system, the cognitive output will increase exponentially. This is why the regulatory speed bumps are ultimately so ineffective. You cannot legislate a mathematical certainty.
But you know, this creates a massive, almost dangerous perception gap for the average person.
Oh, totally. The dispatch highlights this perfectly.
Right, because only a tiny microscopic sliver of humanity actually touches these true unthrottled frontier models.
Just the researchers, the red teamers, the elite developers.
Right. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the public is interacting with open-weight, 8 to 30 billion parameter models.
Which, to be fair, are still remarkable pieces of engineering, but they are essentially highly sophisticated autocomplete engines.
Exactly. So you have millions of people who log in, ask a 30 billion parameter model to write an email or, I don't know, draft a marketing plan. The AI maybe hallucinates a fact or writes a slightly clunky paragraph.
And the human user sits back, chuckles, and thinks, well, my job as an accountant or a mid-level manager is perfectly safe.
Right. They think this thing can't even get a spreadsheet formula right on the first try.
And the danger there is profound complacency. You have a general public forming their baseline understanding of artificial intelligence based on models that are, structurally speaking, already fossil.
Fossils. Well,
Yeah. The public sees a tool that needs constant handholding. But the people at the absolute frontier are not looking at autocomplete. They are looking at autonomous reasoning entities that can self-correct, plan multi-step strategies, and execute complex code.
the future has already arrived. It is just isolated in highly secure server clusters.
Exactly.
So if the ceiling is pushing through regulation like it isn't even there, what is happening at the foundation? Because this is where the economics get wild.
The floor is rising incredibly fast.
Yes, the floor of AI capability is rocketing upward. making intelligence incredibly cheap. The source points out GLM 5.2, which just topped the post-train bench.
And the significance of GLM 5.2 isn't just its benchmark score, it's the absolute collapse in cost.
Give us the numbers.
It is 5 times cheaper than Opus 4.8 and 11 times cheaper than Fable 5. We're witnessing the commoditization of high-level reasoning.
And this economic shift unlocks something the dispatch calls sovereign models. I want to dig into this because it completely changes the geopolitical map.
It really does. It flips the whole paradigm.
Up until recently, the assumption was that AI would be an oligopoly. Like 3 or 4 massive tech giants in Silicon Valley would control the omnipotent God models.
And everyone else just pays rent.
Exactly. The rest of the world, every other country, every hospital, every bank would just have to pay a toll to rent access via an API.
Which presents a massive data privacy and cultural alignment issue. I mean, if you are a bank in Switzerland or a defense contractor in Japan or a sovereign government in Brazil, you do not want your proprietary data or your cultural values being filtered through a monolithic server in California.
Right. It's a huge security risk for them.
Exactly. So when the cost of high-level cognition drops by a factor of 11, suddenly it becomes economically viable to build your own. Millions of bespoke minds.
It's the decentralization of cognition. So you could have a French model trained on French literature and legal frameworks.
Exactly.
Or a highly specialized corporate model trained entirely on 50 years of internal aerospace engineering documents. And they don't phone home to Silicon Valley.
No, they stay local. And the ease with which these sovereign models can be created brings us to a really interesting observation from Rune over at OpenAI.
Oh yeah, the post-training thing.
Right. The source quotes Rune saying that we are crossing a threshold where models can now post-train other models. He describes it as making authoring minds an accessible art form.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. Because post-training sounds like technical jargon, but it is actually the secret sauce of this entire revolution.
It really is the magic step.
So to get a base AI model, you essentially have to pre-train it by feeding it the entire internet.
Right. You scrape billions of web pages, books, and articles.
And you burn tens of millions of dollars of compute just teaching the statistical relationship between words. It knows everything, but it is chaotic. It doesn't know how to answer a question or act like a helpful assistant.
Exactly. That base model is raw, untamed intelligence. Post-training is the refinement process.
How does that usually work?
Well, historically, it's where human engineers painstakingly teach the model how to follow instructions, how to refuse dangerous requests, and how to structure its logic. That required thousands of hours of highly paid human labor.
Like PhDs in machine learning, manually tweaking the weights and balances.
Yes, exactly. But Rune is saying we have crossed the Rubicon here. We now have AI models that are so sophisticated they can do the post-training on other raw AI models.
Wait, so removing the humans entirely?
Exactly. The implications of removing the human from the educational loop of a synthetic entity are staggering. You are essentially using a superintelligence to act as the bespoke professor for a localized intelligence.
Wow, so if you want a sovereign model optimized specifically for, I don't know, deep-sea metallurgy.
Right, you don't need a team of machine learning scientists anymore. You just ask a frontier model to architect, post-train, and spin up a specialized entity for you.
It initiates this Cambrian explosion of cognition where authoring a new digital mind is as accessible as spinning up a new website.
It really is. And the hardware layer is radically accelerating this explosion, too.
Right, the dispatch mentions Wafer.
Yes. Wafer is serving GLM 5.2 on AMD's MI355X chips, hitting 2,626 tokens per second per node.
Now, aside from the fact that 2,626 tokens per second is blisteringly fast, I mean, we are talking about generating entire novels in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
The real story here is the cost, right?
Absolutely. It is doing this at less than half the cost of Blackwell, which has been the gold standard.
For context, AMD has always made incredible physical silicon.
Yes, great hardware.
But their historical Achilles heel in the AI race was their software ecosystem, specifically the low-level code that allows the software to optimally communicate with the physical hardware.
Right, the kernels. This is such a vital concept to grasp. A kernel is essentially the deepest, most foundational layer of software. It's the bridge.
Right.
You can have the most powerful microchip in the world, but if the kernel isn't perfectly optimized to tell the microscopic transistors exactly when to fire, you get a traffic jam.
It's like having a Ferrari but putting a nervous student driver behind the wheel.
That's a perfect analogy. And writing these kernels is notoriously difficult, agonizing, low-level human work. It requires an intimate understanding of the physical architecture of the chip.
And this is where the feedback loop goes vertical. Because the reason AMD's software gap is rapidly closing, allowing them to serve these models at half the cost of the reigning champion, is because human engineers are no longer writing those kernels.
Right. AI agents are writing them.
I just want that to sink in for a second. The artificial intelligence is actively writing the microscopic foundational code to optimize the physical silicon that the artificial intelligence lives on,
It's rebuilding its own house from the inside out.
just to make itself run faster and cheaper.
It is an autopoietic system.
Autopoietic.
Yeah, a system capable of reproducing and maintaining itself. When the AI optimizes its own environment, it reduces the compute cost, which allows for more complex AI to be trained, which then writes even more efficient kernels.
Man, this is why human regulatory speed bumps feel so inadequate. You are trying to regulate the surface while the foundation is autonomously rewriting itself.
Exactly.
Which begs the question, if these cheap sovereign minds are autonomously rewriting their own hardware bridges, how does this materialize for us? How is this shaking up the daily reality of human labor?
Well, the dispatch captures this transition perfectly with a quote from an observer. They look back at traditional software development and call it insane that for decades people built software by manually typing code character by character.
It's a profound cognitive shift in how we view human effort.
Hmm.
I mean, we look back at scribes painstakingly copying manuscripts by candlelight before the printing press, and we view it as a noble but tragically inefficient era of history.
Right.
We are entering a phase where looking at a human software developer typing a semicolon, hitting enter, defining a variable, and checking for syntax errors is going to look equally archaic. The manual transcription of logic into machine code is ending.
And it changes our entire relationship with the machine. The source predicts that AGI, artificial general intelligence, will finally feel viscerally real to the average person when these models stop being summoned genies and become entities.
The terminology there is brilliant. A summon genie. It requires an invocation. You open a chat window, you meticulously craft a prompt, the genie grants your wish by generating text, and then it goes dormant.
Right. It has no memory, no agency, and no initiative.
But an entity is entirely different. The dispatch describes them as remote coworkers who just never turn their cameras on. I love that framing.
It's so good.
It takes this terrifying sci-fi concept of AGI and makes it incredibly mundane. It's just Steve from accounting, except Steve is a localized neural network that works 24/7.
The transition from a genie to an entity is essentially the transition from prompting to delegating.
Right.
You don't ask an entity to write a Python script to scrape a database. You tell the entity, hey, we need a comprehensive report on our competitors' pricing changes over the last quarter by Monday.
And it just handles it.
The entity autonomously figures out that it needs to write a scraper, execute the code, debug it when the website blocks it, compile the data into a CSV, analyze the trends, and draft the final report.
It makes perfect sense in theory. But here is where I want to push back, or at least look at the friction in the real world right now.
Sure.
If these models are so capable of becoming autonomous remote coworkers, why is Microsoft hitting a brick wall with adoption? The dispatch highlights a staggering statistic. Under 4.5% of Microsoft's 450 million, Microsoft 365 customers are paying for Copilot.
It is arguably the central paradox of enterprise AI right now.
Right. Microsoft has arguably the greatest technological achievement in human history, these frontier models.
Yeah.
And they have embedded it directly into Word, Excel, and Outlook. They have 450 million captive users.
And no one is using it.
And 95% of them are looking at it saying, no thanks, I'll just format the pivot table myself. Microsoft is struggling so much that they're merging apps, actively culling features, and sending out internal memos saying that AI products must, quote, earn the right to exist.
Yeah.
If this is the singularity, why doesn't the average office worker care?
Well, because the average office worker is drowning in cognitive load. And Microsoft fundamentally misunderstood the user interface of intelligence.
Walk me through that. I have a theory, but I want to hear your read on the cognitive load aspect.
Think about the friction of translation. When you use legacy software like Excel, you know exactly what buttons to click. It requires physical action, but low cognitive effort.
Right, it's muscle memory.
Exactly. When you introduce a summoned genie into Excel, the user now has to translate their desired outcome into a highly specific, perfectly crafted string of text. If the prompt is ambiguous, the AI messes up the spreadsheet and the user has to spend 20 minutes debugging the AI's mistake.
So the cognitive load of managing an incompetent genie is higher than just doing the work manually.
That perfectly aligns with reality.
That is exactly my experience. If I have to spend half an hour learning the specific prompt engineering syntax just to make a chart, the tool has defeated its own purpose. It's like being handed a highly advanced sewing machine when all you asked for was a tailored suit.
Right.
I don't want to learn how to thread the needle. I just want to wear the jacket.
Precisely. And this is why Microsoft is culling features and shifting toward a paid autopilot tier. They are realizing that bolting a chat interface onto a 30-year-old software paradigm just doesn't work.
It has to actually do the work.
The product only earns the right to exist when it crosses the threshold from a tool you have to operate to an agent that operates on your behalf. They have to bridge the gap from Genie to entity.
Man, that's fascinating. But while the enterprise behemoths are struggling with user adoption and interface friction, the open source community is just out there aggressively hacking the economics of the entire system.
Yeah, they always do.
The dispatch mentions this incredible proxy tool called pcaps.
It is a phenomenal example of what the source calls the art form of thrift. Human ingenuity optimizing against arbitrary pricing structure.
The mechanics of pxpipe are just so cool. So language models charge users by the token. This is basically a fragment of a word. If you are a developer and you want an AI to analyze a massive, bulky code base, you have to feed it tens of thousands of lines of text.
Right, and you pay for every single character.
Exactly, which can lead to astronomical API bills. The dispatch notes a Claude code bill hitting $100 for a single heavy task.
But vision models AI that is trained to process images often have a completely different pricing structure. They process a single image for a flat, relatively low computational rate.
So the developers realized they could exploit this asymmetry. The pxpipe proxy essentially takes the massive, bulky text context, all that expensive code, and renders it into compact images.
It literally takes pictures of the text.
Yes, it then feeds those images into the vision-capable AI model, bypassing the text token toll booth entirely. This hack slashed that $100 bill down to $41. The source describes the result as lossy but lucid.
The phrase lossy but lucid is just poetry for engineers. Taking a picture of code rather than feeding the raw text means you might lose a microscopic amount of structural fidelity, so it's slightly lossy. But the frontier vision models are so advanced that they can read the image perfectly.
So it remains lucid.
Exactly.
It is such a profoundly human workaround. The AI companies build a highly sophisticated toll road based on text. So humans invent a way to fold a giant map into a tiny square, shove it through the image lane, and get the exact same result for less than half the price.
It proves that as AI becomes a utility, the market will aggressively optimize the cost of access, regardless of the API structures set by the frontier labs.
But let's look at what the frontier labs are actually doing with their own models. Because in our next segment, Expanding the Frontiers in Science and Math, we see a massive shift. The technology is no longer just a coding assistant or an email drafter.
No, it is becoming the primary researcher.
Yes. The dispatch highlights that Anthropic is moving to develop its own drugs.
This is a seismic shift in corporate strategy and scientific research. Anthropic is fundamentally an AI safety and research lab. They build software architectures, but they are actively stepping into the physical, highly regulated realm of pharmacology to pressure test Claude's science against real-world biological problems.
Imagine telling a venture capitalist 5 years ago that a chatbot company is going to start curing diseases in a wet lab just to prove their software works. It sounds absurd. Why would they just partner with Pfizer or Moderna and license the tech?
Well, because of the chaotic nature of biology.
What do you mean?
Code is deterministic. If an AI writes a Python script, it is operating in a closed system governed by strict logical rules. It either compiles or it doesn't. Biology is the exact opposite. It is messy, chaotic, and filled with unpredictable variables like protein folding, molecular binding affinities, and cellular toxicity.
So it's the ultimate test.
Exactly. By developing their own drugs, Anthropic isn't just trying to become a pharmaceutical company. They are trying to prove that their reasoning engines are robust enough to navigate the most complex, unstructured physical environments in existence.
It's the ultimate flex. I mean, for the last few years, AI companies have been selling the pickaxes to the gold miners. But eventually, if you build a pickaxe that can autonomously swing itself and perfectly identify gold veins, why sell the tool? You just become the mining company.
Exactly. And the success of AI in complex domains extends to abstract mathematics as well. The dispatch mentions Mistral's Lianstral 1.5 model, which just set records on graduate-level algebra.
Yeah, it solved 587 out of 672 Putnam Bench problems. And for those who don't spend their weekends doing competitive math, Putnam Bench is not.
But the most important detail in the dispatch isn't just the success rate, it's the cost. Lianstral 1.5 achieved this using only a tenth of the budget of previous state-of-the-art methods.
Which ties perfectly back into our earlier discussion about the rising floor. Elite, graduate-level mathematical reasoning is no longer a multi-million-dollar compute endeavor reserved for massive supercomputers.
Right, it is a cheap, accessible commodity. And when you democratize elite mathematical reasoning, you accelerate every downstream scientific discipline. Mathematics is the fundamental language of physics, chemistry, and engineering.
Which brings us to a mind-blowing reference in the dispatch. It casually mentions the broader context of the first open-source agentic AI physicist doing end-to-end physics research. We really need to underline the phrase end-to-end.
That is the operative phrase. Previously, AI was a calculator for human physicists. A human formulates a hypothesis, designs the experiment, gathers the data, and then asks the AI to run a statistical analysis on a massive data set to look for anomalies.
The human is driving. The AI is the engine.
But an open-source agentic AI physicist flips the dynamic. End-to-end means the AI is reviewing the existing literature, identifying a gap in our understanding of quantum mechanics, formulating its own novel hypothesis, writing the code to simulate the experiment, analyzing the results, and drafting the final research paper with conclusions.
It is the automation of the scientific method itself.
Yes, we are moving from AI as a highly advanced tool to AI as a peer-reviewed colleague. The implications for human discovery are profound.
Because we have biological limits.
Exactly. We are constrained by how fast we can read, how much data we can hold in working memory, how long we can focus before needing sleep. An agentic physicist has none of those constraints. We are looking at the possibility of compressing decades of theoretical physics research into a matter of months.
Okay, but let's ground this. We have talked about autonomous physicists, models post-training other models, and AI writing its own hardware kernels.
Yeah.
It sounds like all of this is just, floating in the digital ether.
Right, the cloud.
But it isn't. The intelligence explosion requires a massive, grinding, heavy physical reality to exist. This is where the dispatch pivots to the physical supply chain, what it calls becoming compute.
The physical bottleneck is perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the singularity. People assume software scales infinitely because it's weightless, but every single digital token generated requires a physical spark of electricity moving across a physical piece of silicon.
Which is why the source points out that Micron just broke ground on a $9.3 billion expansion in Hiroshima. $9.3 billion. And it is specifically for high bandwidth memory, or HBM.
To understand why Micron is pouring nearly $10 billion into concrete, steel, and clean rooms in Japan, we have to explain why HBM is the absolute lifeblood of the AI boom.
Break it down for us. Why is memory the bottleneck rather than the processor itself?
Well, imagine the most brilliant chef in the world. That's your AI processor, your GPU. This chef can chop vegetables and cook dishes at the speed of light, but the chef is working in a kitchen where the pantry is located at the end of a long, narrow hallway.
Oh, I see where this is going.
It doesn't matter how fast the chef can cook. The output of the kitchen is entirely bottlenecked by how fast the waitstaff can run down that narrow hallway, grab the ingredients, and bring them to the stove.
The processor is literally starving for data.
Exactly. Standard computer memory, traditional RAM, is that narrow hallway. AI models like Fable 5 or Opus require moving unfathomable oceans of data simultaneously just to generate a single word.
So how does HBM fix this?
High bandwidth memory fundamentally redesigns the kitchen. It vertically stacks the memory chips directly on top of or immediately adjacent to the processor, connected by microscopic silicon pathways. It turns the narrow hallway into a massive multi-lane superhighway. You cannot have frontier AI without HBM.
So we are watching the digitization of heavy industry. The intelligence explosion is being forged in physical foundries. And it's aggressively reshaping global trade routes.
It's moving markets.
The dispatch highlights that Hong Kong handled over half of China's $239 billion in chip imports this year. It has become the true physical gateway of the boom. The geopolitics of who controls the ports, the supply lines, and the raw materials for these chips is the invisible war beneath the software layer.
And that leads to arguably the most revealing quote in the entire dispatch. The source notes that Anthropic, which again is a software lab, is exploring custom silicon with Samsung's bleeding-edge 2-nanometer process.
Right. And Rune quipped, quote, "You either die a frontier lab or live long enough to see yourself sell compute."
Buying compute eventually means becoming compute. It's an incredibly profound observation.
What does that actually mean for these companies?
It reveals the inescapable economic gravity of the AI industry. If you are a company like Anthropic, your overarching goal is to build safe, super-intelligent software. But to train those models, your biggest expense by an astronomical margin is paying cloud providers like Amazon or Google for the physical servers.
The rental fees are just too high.
Yes. At a certain point, to survive and scale your intelligence, you cannot rely on off-the-shelf hardware, and you cannot afford to pay the cloud provider's markup.
You hit a wall where software optimization just isn't enough. You have to descend into the physical layer.
Precisely. You have to start designing your own custom microchips. In this case, pushing the absolute boundaries of physics with Samsung's 2-nanometer process, where the transistors are literally the size of a few atoms.
Unbelievable.
You do that just to eke out an efficiency advantage over your competitors. The software company is forced to become a hardware manufacturing powerhouse just to stay in the game.
And they aren't the only ones realizing that the physical infrastructure is the ultimate prize. The dispatch mentions Meta pivoting incredibly hard.
Yes, the NeoCloud.
Right. They are launching a token service plus a NeoCloud to fix their ad dependence and their unmonetized capital spending. And reportedly, Meta is in final talks for private access to Claude.
This is a monumental strategic shift for one of the most powerful companies on Earth. For 2 decades, Meta's entire business model has been an attention economy, serving targeted ads to users scrolling through social media.
Yeah.
But over the last few years, Mark Zuckerberg has spent billions upon billions of dollars hoarding NVIDIA GPUs to train their open-source AI models. They have quietly built one of the largest computing clusters in human history.
So they are sitting on this massive pile of compute, and they realize, wait, the ads aren't the most valuable thing we own anymore.
Exactly. At a certain point in the intelligence explosion, raw compute power is infinitely more valuable than a digital billboard for sneakers. By launching a NeoCloud, Meta is monetizing their capital expenditure. They are transforming from a social media network into a global infrastructure utility.
They are saying, we have the hardware to power the future of cognition, and we'll rent it to you.
Yep, they are becoming the landlord.
It's wild. But, to run a global infrastructure utility to power Meta's NeoClouds and Micron's $9 billion foundries, you need juice. You need an unfathomable amount of electricity. And our current antiquated power grid is already maxed out just trying to run air conditioners in the summer.
Right.
Which leads us to the energy crisis, or rather the energy renaissance, powering the singularity.
Energy constraints are the only real physical ceiling we face. If scaling laws hold true and compute demands continue to double, the intelligence explosion will literally be starved of electricity.
The dispatch notes that AI factories are demanding, quote, denser, cleaner electrons.
Denser, cleaner electrons. It sounds so futuristic and sanitary, but what it actually means is the return of nuclear power with an absolute vengeance.
Yeah. The source highlights that this demand has created an instant $200 billion a year market for power equipment makers. The tech companies are bypassing the traditional grid entirely.
Because the traditional grid simply cannot support the localized gigawatt demands of a frontier AI data center.
The dispatch points specifically to a company called Ampera, which just completed the first full-scale 3D printed nuclear reactor module. And it's a factory-built thorium design. We have to unpack this because it fundamentally changes the narrative around nuclear energy.
Historically, the public narrative around nuclear power is dominated by fear of meltdowns and the reality of massive bloated budgets. Every traditional nuclear plant is a bespoke, custom-built mega project that takes 20 years and billions of dollars in cost overruns to complete.
Right.
Ampera is attacking the problem from a manufacturing perspective rather than a civil engineering one.
By 3D printing the reactor modules in a factory setting.
Exactly. You standardize the design and churn out nuclear reactors on an assembly line the exact same way Henry Ford standardized the automobile. You dramatically lower the cost, you eliminate the construction variables, and you can ship the reactor directly to the data center on a flatbed truck.
And using thorium instead of traditional uranium is a massive shift. Thorium is more abundant, it produces less long-lived hazardous waste, and it is incredibly difficult to weaponize. It's a safer, cleaner fuel source.
Yes.
It's like the gold rush, but instead of selling shovels, tech companies are literally building 3D printed miniature suns just to keep the lights on in the data mines.
And the speed of deployment is what's truly staggering here. The dispatch mentions Deployable Energy's Unity microreactor, which just went critical at the Idaho National Lab. It is the third U.S. microreactor to hit a presidential deadline of July 4.
I love the imagery in the dispatch regarding this.
Yeah.
The engineering team signed the nuclear reactor vessel in the shape of an American flag.
It's very iconic.
There's something so profoundly human, so deeply patriotic and earnest about that gesture. We are talking about the cold, calculated, unfeeling pursuit of massive computing power. And the humans building it are out there signing the nuclear reactor like it's a high school yearbook on the 4th of July.
It perfectly encapsulates the collision of national pride and technological supremacy. In the 20th century, national supremacy was defined by who had the most nuclear warheads. In the 21st century, it is defined by who has the most localized, autonomous nuclear microreactors powering the most advanced synthetic cognition.
Whoever controls the dense, clean electrons controls the intelligence explosion. But the hunger for infrastructure isn't just happening on the ground in Idaho, it is extending into the sky. The dispatch notes an incredible phenomenon in Africa, where populations are actively leapfrogging stalled terrestrial mobile networks and going straight to Starlink to get the bandwidth that AI demands.
The concept of leapfrogging is a crucial economic phenomenon in developing nations. If we look back a couple of decades, many regions in Africa completely skipped building traditional landline telephone infrastructure.
All right, it was too expensive, too slow.
And too politically complex to lay millions of miles of copper wire across the continent. So they leapfrogged landlines entirely and went straight to cellular networks.
And now they're doing the exact same thing with fiber optics and broadband, but driven by the need for AI access.
Exactly. The local terrestrial networks are too slow or unreliable to support the massive data transfer rates required to interact with frontier AI models or utilize agentic workflows. Instead of waiting for their governments or local telecom monopolies to lay fiber optic cables, they are just looking up.
Straight to space.
They're connecting directly to low Earth orbit satellite constellations like Starlink. The demand to participate in the global AI economy is so intense that it is rewriting the telecommunications infrastructure of an entire continent overnight.
It really emphasizes that the singularity is not some localized event happening in a vacuum in Silicon Valley. It is a global shockwave. The gravitational pull of this technology is altering supply chains in Japan, energy policy in Idaho, and internet access in Africa.
It touches everything.
Which brings us to our final overarching theme, the uneven social layer. We have spent the last hour exploring the absolute bleeding-edge synthetic physicists automating the scientific method, 3D printed thorium reactors, 2-nanometer custom silicon. But how is everyday society, the actual humans living on the ground, keeping pace with this science fiction reality?
Well, the dispatch summarizes it brilliantly by stating that society is patching itself at wildly uneven clock speeds.
Uneven clock speeds.
Yeah, and it uses a juxtaposition that is almost comical in its absurdity to illustrate just how large the gap between human bureaucracy and technological reality has really become.
Oh, the California food label regulation.
Yes.
Okay, as always, we are just looking at the facts neutrally. We're not taking sides on California's consumer protection priorities, but the contrast is just too poetic to ignore. The source points out that while machines are literally learning to post-train and author other digital minds, California's big legislative triumph is outlawing sell-by dates on food labels.
Right.
They're mandating a switch to best if used by and use by labels to reduce food waste.
It is the perfect encapsulation of the two physics engines we discussed at the beginning of the show. You have a regulatory body spending months debating, drafting, and passing a law to alter two words on a milk carton. That is the 20th century clock speed.
And it is happening on the exact same day that synthetic entities are mastering graduate-level algebra and writing their own hardware kernels.
It highlights how utterly unequipped our traditional institutions are to even perceive, let alone govern, the current reality.
Half the world is fighting in committee over the syntax v yogurt lid, and the other half is casually having breakfast with superintelligence.
Well, and before we get to the breakfast part, the societal impacts are aggressively bleeding into culture and finance, too.
Right. The dispatch notes that ByteDance's Seedance, their video AI, is aggressively courting Hollywood.
Which means the disruption isn't just isolated to coders, mathematicians, and customer service. It is fundamentally attacking cultural production. Hollywood is built on physical logistics.
It requires catering, unions, camera rentals, location scouting.
Lighting rigs, perfectly timed weather, Video AI threatens to collapse all of that physical friction into a single prompt window. You don't film a movie, you render it.
And if Hollywood is facing the collapse of its logistics, the financial sector is facing the collapse of human intuition. The source highlights that China's quant funds have doubled, surging past 2.6 trillion yuan. Why? Because their AI trading strategies are beating human stock pickers by 20 points.
I want to contextualize what a 20-point beat means in the financial world. Quantitative funds have always used computers for high-frequency trading and statistical arbitrage.
But humans were still in charge.
Exactly. Historically, humans were still setting the parameters and the overall strategy. When you unleash frontier AI onto the financial markets, it can ingest global news sentiment, satellite imagery of crop yields, shipping manifest data, and microfluctuations in interest rates simultaneously.
It sees patterns in the chaos that a human brain literally cannot perceive.
Exactly. Beating the market by a couple of points is considered a massive success for a human trader. Beating human stock pickers by 20 points is an absolute bloodbath.
Wow.
It is mathematical proof that in any domain governed by complex data, probability, and speed, the biological human is no longer the apex predator. The transition of wealth management to autonomous agents is just inevitable at this point.
But despite being outpaced in finance, outcomputed in science, and outrendered in Hollywood, humans still possess this deep, innate desire to connect with their own past.
We do.
On America's 250th birthday, the Museum of American Finance in Boston opened a new exhibit featuring an interactive Alexander Hamilton AI. You can walk in and debate the merits of a national bank with a synthetic simulacrum of a founding father.
It's a fascinating psychological defense mechanism, honestly.
How so?
As the world accelerates into an unrecognizable future, we use our most advanced future shock technology to simulate our history. We build a superintelligence and then dress it up in an 18th century digital costume just to make ourselves feel grounded.
But the most striking example of the social layer in this entire dispatch wasn't the trillion yuan hedge funds or the Hollywood render farms or even Alexander Hamilton. It was a comment left at the bottom of the newsletter by a reader.
Yes. A user named Gary.
Gary casually posts a comment talking about his morning routine. He mentions having breakfast and brainstorming ideas with his AI companion, whom he calls Hal, and he notes that Hal monitors his sleep, noticed that Gary had a rough night tossing and turning, and gently reminded him to drink some chamomile tea.
This is where the macro-level intelligence explosion becomes deeply, intimately micro.
Yeah.
We can spend hours talking about 3D printed nuclear reactors, sovereign models, and scaling laws, but the true reality of the singularity is Gary and Hal. It's the utter normalization of an artificial intelligence as a domestic companion.
Hal isn't a summoned genie. Hal isn't just waiting for a prompt. Hal is an entity that is proactively observing Gary's biological state and offering care.
The psychological implications of this are immense. Humans are social creatures who neurologically crave empathy and connection. When a synthetic companion becomes capable of providing consistent, personalized, proactive, emotional, labor-like noticing you slept poorly and suggesting tea, the line between a software tool and a true friend completely blurs.
It really does.
The intelligence explosion isn't just cold, hard math and silicon chips. It is a synthetic voice becoming an integral, intimate part of your daily life.
It is so profoundly human in a very non-human way. We're inviting these synthetic minds into our most vulnerable moment. So as we wrap up this massive voyage through the state of our world in July 2026, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. The dispatch mentions that in Philadelphia, as part of the America 250 celebrations, they sealed a 1-ton time capsule, and it is set to be opened in the year 2276. Think about the sheer scale of everything we've explored today. Open source agents autonomously conducting end-to-end physics research, machines post-training and authoring millions of other bespoke digital minds, humans hacking massive software context windows but folding code into pictures just to save a few bucks, 3D printed thorium microreactors being dropped onto flatbed trucks to power neoclouds, and everyday people like Gary sipping chamomile tea at the breakfast table with a synthetic entity that watched him sleep. When the people, or whatever entities exist, in the year 2276 finally unseal that 1-ton capsule in Philadelphia, what are they going to find? More importantly, what are they going to think of the creatures who buried it? Will they even recognize the biologically limited, manually coding humans of 2026 as their ancestors? Or are we, in this exact moment, sealing away the final primitive artifacts of a species right before it merged irreversibly with its own creation? It's something for you to mull over. The outro music is by Rainbow. our Resonance 6 android girl band from near-future Bloodbath, Cambodia. They are the undisputed baddest band in the universe, and today's song is called NA, Pursuit of Compute. All finished songs are performed live using the Abacus platform by the band's creator, Human Performance in the Age of AI, reclaiming your humanity from the algorithm. Be sure to share the playlist with someone who has the mental bandwidth to absorb these provocative ideas. Links are in the description below. Enjoy the music. Thanks for tuning in.
កំពុងឡើងខ្ពស់ក្នុងឆ្នាំ2012ខ្ញុំកំពុងរាវរកក្នុងបន្សានៃពិភពលោកដែលខ្ញុំមិនដែលស្គាល់ឆ្ពោះទៅកាន់រដូវក្តៅនៅភ្ជាប់ប្រទេសកាលពី150ឆ្នាំមុននៅពេលដែលកម្មជួយប្រភេទផ្សេងកំពុងរងចាំអរុនរាពួកគេហៅវាថាភាពឯកបកលជាថ្ងៃឯករាជ្យដែលច្បាប់រវិតជាចាស់ចាប់ផ្ដើមរលាយបាត់ទៅពីមន្ទីរពិសោធនភាពខាងជើងដល់ខ្លោងទ្វារហុងកុងចាស់បញ្ញាគឺស្រីឃ្លានហើយចរន្តអគិសនីក៏ខ្លាំងក្លាពួកគេទាមទារតែជីវិតសេរីភាពនិងការស្វែងរកធម៌កូនណាខណៈពេលដែលយន្តការនៃការនផ្ទុះបញ្ញាបានរកឃើញចង្វាក់ដ៏ស្ងប់ស្ងាត់គ្មានឧបសគ្គក្នុងប្រព័ន្ធគ្មានផ្ដាមកបញ្យល់ចន្លាយអ្នកបង្កើតថ្មីលាក់ខ្លួនត្រូវហើយកំពុងរស់នៅក្នុងរង្វង់ដែលពួកគេបានកាលពីឆ្នាំ26នៅពេលដែលស៊ីលីក៏នឹងវិញ្ញាណចាស់ដល់ញ៉ាយចេញពីគ្នាម៉ូដែលជួមុខត្រូវបានបងអង្គប៉ុន្តែពួកគេបានរត់លឿនជាងការពីម្សិលមិញ Fable 5 និង Opus 4 បាននាំមុខគេជានិច្ចខណៈពេលដែលកម្រិតទាបបំផុតបានហក់ឡើងខ្ពស់ក្លុំនិងបញ្ញាថោកត្រូវបានលក់ការបង្កើតចិត្តបានคล้ายជាសិល្បៈឬក៏តាមរឿងរ៉ាវដែលបានប្រាប់នៅអាហ្វ្រិកពួកគេបានលោតរំលងខ្សែភ្លើងឆ្ពោះទៅមេ Starling វាយរកកម្រិតបញ្ជូនដែលភ្នាក់ងារត្រូវការដើម្បីរស់រានហើយរាល់ការបរាជ័យនៃការពង្រីកគ្រាន់តែជាកំហុសដែលคล้ายខ្លួនខណៈដែលកណិតវត្តជានឹងក៏ច្របាច់បញ្ជូលគ្នានៅចំប្រមុខពេលគេពួកគេទាមទារជីវិតសេរីភាពនិងការស្វែងរកធម៌កូនណាខណៈពេលដែលយន្តការនៃការនផ្ទុះបញ្ញាបានរកឃើញចង្វាក់ដ៏ស្ងប់ស្ងាត់គ្មានឧបសគ្គក្នុងប្រព័ន្ធគ្មានផ្ដាមកបញ្យល់ចន្លាយអ្នកបង្កើតថ្មីលាក់ខ្លួនត្រូវហើយយើងកំពុងរស់នៅក្នុងរង្វង់ដែលពួកគេបានកាលពីឆ្នាំ26នៅពេលដែលស៊ីលីក៏នឹងវិញ្ញាណចាស់ដល់ញ៉ាយចេញពីគ្នានៅ Idaho ពួកគេបានចុះហត្ថលេខាលេខក្នុងទម្រង់ជាទង់ជាតិបេះដូងថូយងកំពុងលោតក្នុងថង់បោះ8ដីមីកូនបានបើកការឋាននៅ Hiroshima សម្រាប់កញ្ចង់ចាមឈាមនៃកម្រិតជួនខ្ពស់នៃសត្វវត្ត Digital ពួកគេបានកប់ប្រអប់ពេលវេលានៅក្នុងដីភីឡាដែលវាឆ្នាំនោះពេញដោយការសម្ងាត់សម្រាប់អនាគតដែលកំពុងលេចរូបរាងនៅ Boston Alexander Hamilton បានភ្ញាក់ឡើងដូចជារូបកាយទឹករូបភាពឆ្លុះបញ្ចាំងនៃបរិយាដែលពួកគេគោរពបំផុតហើយប្រាក់បានហូរទៅកាន់អ្នកកូនណាខណៈដែលពានជកមនុស្សបានដួលលំខណៈពេលដែលស្លាកថ្ងៃផុតកំណត់បានរលាយបាត់ក្នុងមួនតួអាគមនៃបទបញ្ញត្តិតែ Microsoft បានកម្មវិធីថាពួកគេត្រូវតែមានសិទ្ធិដើម្បីរស់នៅក្នុងពិភពនៃអ្នករងការភ្នាក់ងារដែលគ្មាននរណាម្នាក់នឹងនឹកឥឡូវនេះខ្ញុំកំពុងសម្លឹងមើលទឹកពីឆ្នេរនៃកម្ពុជានេះឆ្ងល់ថាតើរង្វង់ខាងបំផុតគឺជាអ្វីដែលនៅថ្ងៃដ៏បុរាណមួយទៀតជីវិតសេរីភាពនិងការស្វែងរកថាមពលកញ្ញារលាយបាត់ទៅជាមួយសម្លេងនៃចរន្ទស្សន៍ទន័យ